So now the prep work's done and we're ready to put the fabric on. So I've already started a couple in different stages, except for the top piece. The top piece, I'm going to show you how to do the whole thing because it's 3 pieces, not 4. So it's just a little bit more difficult, not much. So I've got my wax paper laid down, and I've got it laid down 2 different sheets. So I'm going to take my first top piece, and you want to make sure that your hands are clean before you start this. Now I'm doing this without gloves to show y'all an example of how to do it without the gloves, because when recording this, they're not readily available right now. So I'm going to get everything out of the way because I'm going to show you how to do the first pieces on the big ornament ball. I'm lucky with these styrofoam balls that I get because there's a center line from where they molded them that's going to give me a good center start with putting down my first 2 pieces. So what I do with the glue is I put it directly onto the fabric. I have found that this wastes less glue to do it this way than is to put it in a cup and dip my brush and dip and dip and dip and dip. Now I have already done quite a few and there's a little bit of excess glue on my brush. So to keep from wasting, because there's so much, I'm going to go ahead and brush it onto my fabric to kind of clean my brush out. So you want to find a good balance between enough and not too much. So typically what I do is I start and I just make a circle with my glue and down the center. And it's a pretty thin line that I make. And I start by making my brush strokes up and holding the fabric down so that I can brush. You want to make sure you go completely out to the edge. That's very, very important. And you want to make sure that the whole piece of fabric is covered. But you want to be careful and not saturate the fabric either. Like I said, you're going to have to find a fine line, and you might have to try this on a scrap piece of fabric first to get your technique down. But just remember, you can always squirt more glue out of the bottle, but it's kind of a little bit difficult to take it back. So now that I've got my edges completely done, and the reason I've got 2 pieces of wax paper here is so I can slide this one over to the side. Because I'm going to leave my ornament ball on its base. It's easier to deal with putting this large piece of fabric on. If I leave it on the base, it gives me something to keep it from rolling around and I won't have to chase the ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my piece of fabric, and because I've got that line, that's going to give me a place to put my finger down and hold my tip down and lay my fabric down and get a straight curve. Now I'm going to give my fabric a little bit of stretch, because that's why it's important that the fabric stretches. A little bit of stretch to lay the tip down. And then I'm going to take and just smooth it out. Now I've noticed that it's a little bit off center here, so you can just scoot your fabric as you need to. Don't lift it back up. It's wet. Just scoot it as you need to line it up. If you don't have those lines on your ball, that's fine. That's actually fine. It's a round piece. Just make sure when you put your second piece on that it lines up. If your glue seeps through quite a bit, take a damp rag and just kind of, because when it dries funny. So you kind of want to make sure you just kind of get that chunkiness off. Okay. So we're going to let this piece dry. This piece has to be dry before we put the next piece on. If it's not dry, especially on this kind of styrofoam, it slides around and you don't want it to slide around. So while this piece is drying, I'm going to show you how to put the first piece on the top piece. So stay with me as we're going to kind of go back and forth just to keep the process moving. And this is what I do when I'm doing this myself, is I'll put one piece of fabric on, 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 and rotate around, because it's super fast, 5 minutes to dry. So because it's so fast to dry, by the time I get back to this one, it's dry and it's ready for me to put my next piece of fabric on. So this was my big piece of wax paper. So I'm kind of going to slide it out of the way because I don't want glue in the center of this. So I'm going to bring my other piece and lay it down and put my glue on there. Now I just put a little bit too much at the top. So because I know I did that, I'm going to start at the top and smooth down. Don't worry about if your fabric frays. I'm going to show you how to take care of that because this one does fray quite a bit. So because you're only using 3 pieces here, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to peel this up, and we're going to start by putting this on the top, and I'm going to use my thumb to hold this down. And then I've got it dangling, and I'm going to grab my bottom corner and I'm going to lay it down straight and pull it down to the center bottom. Once I get it there, I'm going to take my finger and smooth out again. Always smooth from the inside out. You don't want to go pull down. You want to smooth from the inside out to get your bubbles out or your waves in your fabric. Because if you go from the bottom down, you're going to just move your fabric up and down. So you don't want to do that. So that's our first piece on there, and I'm going to set that aside because the more layers that you put on here without that being dry, it's going to take longer to dry. As far as your frays go, this is actually the bottom piece, so it kind of doesn't matter. But what you want to do, and I've got another piece of wax paper sitting here, is you just want to take your brush and gently brush them up. Go with the grain of the fabric and brush them up and out of the way. Now, if it's too long, like that one, you probably just might want to cut it off. But I definitely wouldn't do this with your finger because then you'll move your fabric. So you just brush them out of the way and back into the fabric. So now we're going to put our second piece on, our big ball. If you have to walk away from this, your wax paper and everything like that, and it starts to dry, you're going to have to change out your wax paper. So with the second piece, I'm going to flip my ball over. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it up. And your tips are going to your points are going to overlap. And they're going to overlap probably about a ½ inch. So I'm going to overlap my point. And then once again, I'm going to be very careful to lay it down. I don't want it to really adhere yet, and aim it up with my other point. And sometimes on the points, because of handling it tip to tip, it comes off, so I just take a little bit of extra glue off my brush and brush it down. So now I'm going to smooth out my edges. And then I'm going to turn this on its side, take a look, make sure that I'm centered for it to dry. So we're going to slide that one out of the way. So now I'm going to move on to this one to show you how to put your third and fourth piece on. So like I said, we're going to skip around so that we can make this go, you know, as far as you watching, as fast as possible. So I'm going to pull out my fabric for my 8-inch ball. So what I've done is I've made sure that my two pieces are running parallel, and you're going to find the center of your tips. So I'm going to pull my piece up once again, and I'm going to go directly to the center, and I'm going to gently lay that down. And it might wrinkle a bit, that's okay. We're not worried about that. And we're going to give this a little bit of stretch and go directly to the center of the other tips. Now I'm facing it toward me so I can double check and make sure that there's the even amount of space between here and here. And since there is, and it kind of wrinkled a little bit, I'm going to have to pull it out, and that's okay. So I'm just going to unpull it and just start laying it down. So we're going to set that aside, and we're going to get our next 8-inch piece. My tip's got some stuff drying, so I'm going to use this other scrap piece of wax paper that I got over there to clean my tip off, because we don't want that gunk in our fabric. So I need just a smidge more. So if you notice like something like this happening, your tip coming up, don't panic. Just take your brush, put a little bit down, and smooth it down. So now I'm going to flip this over, put my other piece down at the bottom, and once again, we're going to go tip to tip. slide that down, and then just going to double check and make sure that we have even spacing. If you're in doubt if you have even spacing, pick up your next piece before you put it down, before you go to smooth it down. Just pick up your next piece and make sure that it's going to cover all of the styrofoam. So my tip's coming up a little bit. Like I said, that typically happens because of handling it. It comes off on my fingers. So I've kind of gotten used to that. So now we're going to set that one aside. So the first piece is definitely dry on the top piece. And I'm going to take a wet cloth and I'm going to get all this excess glue off my hands because it is sticking to my hands. So that's what you're going to want to do, stick it in your hands. That's why you need to keep a wet cloth handy. Or just get up and wash your hands, whatever you choose to do. So the spacing on this is just a little bit different because it's only 3 pieces. So you can't do it as evenly as the 4. So we're going to do this one just a little bit different. We're going to start at the bottom. And we put the top piece on, but we're going to do this one a little bit different because what you're going to do is you're going to overlap these two. And the way that you're going to overlap it, you're going to know you're going to run this piece this way. So you want these pieces to be almost parallel in how they run. This one's going to run straight down the center. So I'm kind of going to double check and look, and then I'm going to pull this piece up to give it that little bit of stretch and hold it down. And if it looks like it's a little bit too close, you just kind of scoot it over. If you're having problems getting this to lay down, you need to give your fabric just a little bit more stretch. That's why it's important to cut the fabric, because the stretch, when you stretch it, going around these shapes, that's what's going to help it lay down flat. So once again, we got a little bit of frays. So I'm just going to take my brush. And the reason I'm doing this is because it is pretty bad and I don't want any bumps in my second layer. So now we're going to set that aside and let it dry. So now I'm going to pull my fourth ball out, or my third ball out. It's got all 4 pieces on it. So with this one, because it's got all 4 pieces on it, now this is slick styrofoam, we're actually going to be able to put all 4 pieces on. So I flipped my other piece over, and the reason I'm doing it is because I don't want gunk and stuff. And what I'm going to do with these, because I can put all 4 pieces on now, is I'm going to lay them all out. Now, if you can't move as fast as I can, just do 2 pieces. Put the glue on. Whatever is in your comfort zone, your speed. Just remember that if you try to do it like this, they're drying while it's waiting to go on there. So if you're not able to move that fast, so for me, this is probably the part that's going to take, you know, the longest, but it doesn't seem that long because I'm constantly doing something because of the way I rotate and put one piece of fabric on and then start over. So I'm actually going to pick up the ornament ball this time because that's just easiest for me. But if you can't, you can still go ahead and lay it down. But what I like to do when I put my first next piece on is I like to start tip to tip, corner to corner to lay it on. I just want to make sure that I'm going center to center. And that's really important that you go center to center. So I'm always smoothing from the inside out. And there's quite a bit of fray. So I'm just going to pull that down because my trim is going to cover that. Or you can kind of like raise it up a little bit and trim it off with your scissors if it's as bad as what I've got. I always keep my scissors around just in case. Just don't forget to wipe the glue off. And then I'm going to go tip to tip again. Do it that top so you can see what I'm doing, tip to tip again. And then I'm going to come around the ball. And make sure that they line up. Now you have to be really careful. If you're not careful with what you're doing, to put these on, you will have to wait till each piece dries. So that's kind of why I like to do it in the rotation too that I do, so I don't have to worry about my pieces moving, period. So now that we got those pieces on, we're going to spin it around. Move on to the next piece. Go directly to the center. And if you feel your fingers getting too much glue on them, it is time to wipe them off. You don't want your fabric sticking to your fingers. We're going to roll on even though I just spilt my coffee. I'll clean that up in a minute. Okay, so We're going to put the last piece on here. Once again, going tip to tip, find the center. Smooth it out. So once I get done with these, I always double check before I set it to the side, and I make sure everything is good and smoothed out. And then I kind of put it up on edge, leaving the outside open. I don't lay it like this because these are the layered side and they're going to be more wet, so they need a little bit more air to dry. So I lay it like this so that it dries. So we're going to put our third piece on, and I'm going to fold this over to kind of give me a little bit of clean work area. Despite the coffee going all over the place. Forgive me just 1 second. I'm going to use my wet towel to stop that from going all over the place. If there was a blooper reel for recording tutorials, I just made it. Okay. So now we're going to put this piece down. And this is going to be the third piece on this one. And if you do like I just did and it rolls up like that, that's okay. So once again, we're going to go to the bottom with this piece. And we're going to make sure that our tip is directly in the center of the piece. And we want to go directly up the center of our two pieces. And I'm always pulling that over the top. And then I hold it for a couple seconds. And then I start smoothing it out. And then I'm going to check and make sure that these are all even enough for my last piece to go on. Don't do this. Make sure y'all don't have your coffee sitting there. I had the coffee sitting there so I could wet my whistle if I needed to while I was talking. So this is a bonus clip right here, y'all. Because I'm not re-recording. All right, so now we're going to come back to the big red piece, and we'll put those two pieces of fabric on, and then we'll come back and put these two pieces of fabric on. Once you get those on, come on back, and we're going to Mod Podge them.